Getting close to finishing our series on David. We're going to, it's a little out of order. It was last week. It will be this week. I was at a wedding yesterday, and a person at the wedding came up to me and said, most of the people at the church haven't heard my testimony or part of it, and I'd like to give it whenever you think it'd be appropriate. So Grady's speaking today. How about if you do it next week? So next week we're going to hear it, but I think what I share next week may be a little more fitting with what she's going to, I'm guessing, I haven't heard it, so what they'll say. So you look forward to a mystery speaker next week. And so anyway, I think it'd be great to hear it. And just it's also interesting, we've been praying that the Lord would just show us with the building, and obviously it's got to be in His hands. That's the only way it's going to work. Or He'll show us it's not. And we need to thank Him either way, whichever way it is. Just make it very clear, yes or no. And that's what's going on. As you know, I like to study Bible characters and just characters in general. One of them if you don't know much about him, John Wycliffe was a Bible scholar, a preacher, and then he's also a Bible translator. It's where you get the Wycliffe Bible translators from. There's a Wycliffe commentary that's out. He was put to death in 1384 for what I believe was his greatest achievement. What was he put to death for? Anybody know? What?
Translating Latin.
Translating the Latin Bible into English, Old and New Testament. Because he translated the Bible into English, he was put to death for translating the Bible into English. And it's interesting, on this new Bible that he translated, these words were put, and he wrote in his own handwriting on the leaflet of his Bible. This is what it states. It's kind of an interesting deal that he has. Find out. This Bible is translated and shall make possible a government of the people, by the people, and for the people.
Wow.
500 years later, President Lincoln took the same quote, and you remember a year and a half before his death, said that before this is going on, this is a new era. It's going to bring about healing, and we'll have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So notice John Wesley brought about a new era. Lincoln, at his death and at the funeral, one of them said this brought an end to an era, but it also brought a beginning to an era. So you never know what takes place. So today we're going to look at the end of an era, talking about David, but it also was the beginning of an era. But I'd like to challenge us to think about it. If you want a title for the sermon today, it would be Ending a Life Well Done. How can I end a life and have it well done? Yes, he made mistakes, but he did a great job. Challenge would be, look over in Acts 13, first of all. Under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, it's an amazing statement, what was said of David. And by the way, every one of us ought to put our own name in here. In Acts 13:36, it states, For David, after he had served the purpose of God in his own generation, fell asleep. Shouldn't that be able to be said of each one of us? What is the purpose of God that He has for you, for your generation? Notice David was to be king and to do all these things and to lead his people and the military stuff and so on. He did it, and he did it well. But the question comes down, David did it well, but what about you and I? God has a purpose for you and I, but how well are we doing the purpose that He has for what He wants us to do? So let's look at it. The end of his life, this is what he was doing right at the end. First Chronicles, we have it in chapter 28 and then also in chapter 29. So look at it first of all. So you have the challenge. And what you think about it again, what is your purpose? And are you fulfilling your purpose? Remember, there's a difference. How many of us have a purpose, but our purpose may not be what God's purpose is? And I think the biggest question is, what does God want for my life? Not necessarily what I want. So think about it. One of it happens, how many of you ever had dreams and those dreams didn't kind of work out the way you wanted? Anybody have any of those? Okay, you're going to find it in 1 Chronicles 28, 1-8, what I like to call, you have the challenge now, the course derailment. The course derailment. Since we have that, a railroad man here, we have a few of those, don't we? Derailments. We have them a lot. And it's always interesting watching them fix that. But notice, first of all, notice who's there in verse 1. 28:1. That David assembled at Jerusalem all the officials of Israel, the princes of the tribes, the commanders of the divisions that served the king, commanders of thousands, commanders of hundreds, the overseers of property and livestock, belonging to the king and his sons, with officials, with the mighty men, and even all the valiant men. Kind of some dignitaries there, wouldn't you say? Everybody who's anybody was there. So you ever wonder who that would be, in our country, or in our city, and so on. So all the dignitaries are there. Notice his desire. David states his desire. And can you imagine, everybody's there. Picture it. David stands up. You think about it. David rose to his feet. Remember now, he is what age? 70. Remember, he's 30 when he becomes king, 70 when he passes away. So try to, close to 70. He rises to his feet. He said, "Listen to me, my brethren, and my people. I've intended to build a permanent home for the ark of the covenant of the Lord and for the footstool of our God. So I made preparations to build it." That's his desire. I want to build a temple. Notice the derailment. "But God said to me, you shall not build a house for my name, because you are a man of war and have shed blood." What does he want to do? I want to build the temple. And what does God say? No. Now how does it start pouting? I didn't get my way. And I think that happens for a lot. All of us have different plans that we have, but is it my plans? Is it God's plan? So notice what he does. God derails him, and notice what he does in verse 4. Notice how his attitude changes. "Yet the Lord, the God of Israel, chose me for the house of my father to be king over Israel forever. For he has chosen Judah to be the leader in the house of Judah, my father's house, and among the sons of my father. He took pleasure in me to make me king over all of Israel." So is he dwelling on what God has chosen him to do, or he's dwelling on what God has not chosen him to do? And I think what happens, notice, okay, that's not what he wants me to do, but I'm thankful for what he did choose me to do. And again, who makes that choice? I can dwell on what he said no to, or I can dwell on what he said yes to. And David did, according to Psalms 78, 72, did a fabulous job of shepherding Israel. So think about it in our own, just on the derailment part. What decision? When God says no to something, whatever. And that direct derailment can be a lot of reasons. It could be health reasons, it could be financial reasons, it could be all kinds of things that happen in your life that you don't plan for. And now all of a sudden, what can I do, or what does God want me to do? He allowed it to happen, so he's derailed it. So what am I going to do? He chose to look at what God did choose him to do, and so on. Notice then what he does. He gives directions then, starting in verse 5. You think about it. Of all his sons were there, right? Every living one that was there. And notice what he says. "And of all my sons, the Lord has given me many sons. He has chosen my son Solomon to sit on the throne in the kingdom of the Lord over Israel." How old would Solomon be approximately at this time? 20. Does he have brothers who are about 40? How do you think they're feeling about now? And hey, the little brother chose, and but notice David says what? Who chose him? God did. God, I didn't get to do what I wanted with the Lord, but I did what he chose me to do. He chose me to be king over my older brothers. He's now chosen Solomon to be king over you all. I didn't make the choice. God did. We need to realize God gives us different gifts. And, same thing with my brother. God gave him gifts that I don't have. And you have to just recognize it and then be thankful and so on. So notice then, that's the person. He's chosen the person. Notice the path. And notice what he says in there in verse 6. "And he said to me, your son Solomon is the one who shall build my house, my courts, for I have chosen him to be a son to me, and I will be a father to him. I'll establish his kingdom forever." Notice, if he resolutely performed my commandments, my ordinances, as is done now. That's quite a statement. In front of everybody, I have David, I have done it, and the people who are here, we have done the ordinances and have kept them. That's why God's blessed. If you all want this, Solomon, you're going to have to do it, and you as the people are going to have to do it. It's great. You ever think about it, even in our own lives as we're getting older? How do we ever have these kind of talks with our kids and so on? Hey, we've been blessed because we followed the Lord. And if you want to be blessed, you're going to have to do the same thing. But there's accountability too now. Hey, it's not because of me, David's saying, it's because of what we've done with the Lord. And then notice the opposite of the promise. So now in the sight of all Israel, the assembly of the Lord, in the hearing of our God, observe and seek after all the commandments of the Lord your God, in order that you may possess the good land and bequeath it to your sons after you forever. You have a choice in front of everybody to do it. So think about the derailment. What dreams do you have? And are they God dreams? Any of you been derailed in your dreams? I mean, what I would desire to do is not going to happen. I mean, that's just the fact of it. God's chosen other things. But so then what are you going to do with the derailment? Are you going to serve the best you can with where you're at and recognize He's the boss? Think about it. If you're not, what are you doing now? I think it's interesting. What does God desire for me to do? And do I look at life from God's point of view? You remember Samuel was going to choose the wrong person too, wasn't he? And so it's easy for every one of us to not see it from the way God sees it. So easy. Let's think about it. So here you have our challenge. Remember, he was served God's purpose in his life. You have the derailment. What am I going to do with the derailment? And we're all going to have different derailments at different times in our life. Notice then the charge to the chosen heir. We have that starting in verse 9 down to 21. So he's in front of everybody. All his kids are there. All the dignitaries are there. And now he's going to give a charge to his son, to Solomon. Notice what he says in verse 9. As for you, my son Solomon, know the Lord of your father, the God of your father. Now you think about what does it mean to know? I think it's important to recognize it's not just head knowledge. It would be, in the New Testament, it would be equivalent to the Greek word gnosko. It means to know by experience. You have a personal relationship with. And so, notice before he ever tells him anything else, his first instructions is your relationship with God. And the most important thing, I think, is you think about it, if you own a business and you're passing it on to your kids, how many times are we talking about business instead of talking about the most important thing is your relationship with God? So notice, first of all, know your God, and then notice the second thing, and serve Him with a whole heart and a willing mind. Those of you that have been through the Old Testament reading and a lot of different things, notice almost every time you see he'll follow David, but not with a whole heart. Constantly repeated over. So he's given the challenge. Solomon, you can make this challenge. It's up to you. Are you going to follow him with a whole heart or aren't you? Are you going to know him and know him personally like you should? Now we know he's going to get in trouble because he doesn't follow it later in life. But again, that was his decision. But he's making the charge for everyone to see, so everyone hears the charge. Now, how much accountability do you think it's going to be when he starts taking other wives? Hey, what charge did Dad give you? What charge did this happen? Now, what's going to happen to us if we don't follow him, Solomon? How many of us want that accountability factor? He's doing it wisely, publicly, for everyone to hear. So know him and to serve him. Notice what else he says. And understand every intent of thoughts. If you seek him, he will let you find him. But if you forsake him, he'll reject you forever. Well, do you think Solomon saw any of that in David's life when he messed up and the consequences? You think about it, here you have it then. You have you have to know him, to serve him, and the reminders. If you do it, this will happen to you. If you don't, this is going to happen to you. There are consequences. He makes it very obvious. Then he's just going to tell him the course. Now, I want to put verse 10 down to verse 20 because he's going to pick up on it. First of all, notice the course he wants you to take. And we'll jump over to 19 because 11 to 18 actually tells you. But notice in 19, all this. And what he does is he's going to give in verse 11 down to 18, he gives a complete pattern. And I can just see him up there up front, in front of everybody. He calls Solomon up there, and he pulls up a map. Because he lays out a map of how the temple is supposed to be built and where everything's supposed to go. And you know that because of verse 19. All this, said David, the Lord made me understand in writing by his hand upon me all the details of this pattern. Hey, this is how the temple is supposed to be built. This is the material and the placement of it and everything. This is what you're supposed to do. He lays it all out. And he gives you all the different materials, what's supposed to be done from verse 11 down. So remember, it's amazing. We always call it Solomon's temple. But you think about how involved David was in the building of this. The materials that were gathered, the pattern, everything. So he's given us instructions, what he needs to do. But I want you to notice in verse 10, and then also in verse 20. Think about it now, if you're 20 years of age, how would you feel if your dad, who's been the greatest king in Israel's history, enlarged your boundaries from 6,000 square miles to 60,000 square miles? I mean, really, it's amazing what, with God's blessing, what all David did for this nation. Notice then what he tells him in verse 10. You have older brothers and all the men of war and everything. Let's go from verse 10 then to verse 20. Consider now, for the Lord has chosen you to build a house for the sanctuary. Be courageous and act. Isn't that what he told way back with Joshua? In Joshua 1, be courageous. Who did he replace? Moses. How do you want to replace David? Have any of you ever replaced a legend? I mean, it's tough. My first job of coaching, I replaced a guy that's in the Hall of Fame, Oklahoma Hall of Fame. Coached for over 50 years. Knew more about basketball, forgot more than I'll ever know. I mean, it's amazing. How in the world can you replace that? Go follow a guy like that. So notice then, go to verse 20. Then David said to his son Solomon, be strong and be courageous and act. Same thing. Do not fear nor be dismayed, for the Lord God, my God, is with you. He will not fail you nor forsake you until all the work of the service of the house of the Lord is finished. Who's going to be with you? Is it going to be tough? You bet it will be. It's not going to be easy. Now notice 21. But notice, I think it's interesting. He gives a command to the king, be courageous and act. He then says, reminder, God's going to be with you. But then notice in verse 21, who else? Now behold, there are divisions of the priests and Levites for all the service of the house of God. Every willing man of any skill will be with you in all the work of the kinds of service. Officials also and all the people will be entirely at your command. Who's going to be there to help you? All of them are going to be. You aren't building this alone. Anytime you try to build something alone, that's exactly, it ain't going to work, or it's not going to be to God's glory. So you think about it. Here you have it. The challenge for anyone, for Solomon being that young, to be courageous, but realize God's with you each step of the way, and you got people there to help. So you think about it. Since God still left all of us here on earth, does he want us to do something? So what purpose does he have for me right now at this time in my life where we're at? What does he want me to do? What's my part? And what am I fearful of? I think it's a very real part that we're fearful of it. And I think also, notice what he had here. What did he tell him? You have Solomon, you're not alone. You've got God, and you've got a team. How well do we need to remember that? We're not alone. We have God, and we have a team. So think about it as we go through the different things that are going on. Notice the next part. He has a challenge to the people. Then you go to chapter 29, how he challenges the people. There's a problem. Notice in verse 1 the problem. Then King David said to the entire assembly, now remember, he's up front, he gives the first part of the speech, and then the next part he talks to who? Just talks to Solomon. Now he's going to turn to his attention to all the people. Notice he says, my son Solomon, whom alone God has chosen, is still young and inexperienced. That'd be true, wouldn't it? How'd you like to be 20 and be head over, I mean, I wouldn't want to be head over now, and I'm quite a bit older than 20. I wouldn't want it. But notice, God's chosen him. And notice he says, still young and inexperienced, the work is great. For the temple is not for man, notice, but for the Lord God. I think it's important always to recognize. We're not building the temple for man. We're building it for God. I think it's always important, the church doesn't take the place of the temple, I'm not suggesting it. But this, anything that's done is for the Lord. I think it's important. So notice then, that's the problem that you have. He's inexperienced, they're going to build this. So what do you do about it? Notice we need some, the pattern that we have. Starting in verse 2, notice who sets the pattern. Now with all my ability I provided for the house of the Lord. Remember, I being David. And the gold for the things of gold, the silver for things of silver, the bronze, things of the iron, and notice the wood, and then notice the stones, and then different precious stones, and alabaster. David's taking this out of his personal wealth. Now, how would you like it if you're the sibling sitting out there? What's happening to part of your inheritance? Now, the reason I said it, doesn't it happen a lot today? If people decide that they want to take their inheritance, which is theirs, if they want to give it to missions, that's their choice. Notice David has taken a lot of his wealth, and also, if you look at the parts, we're talking about a huge amount of resources. And he's given it to the Lord. For what purpose? For the purpose of the temple. It needs this gold, it needs silver. Because remember, God showed him what all the pattern is going to be, and it's going to take a tremendous amount. More than what David has, but David's giving a tremendous amount of his own to it. So he goes down, and notice it says in verse 3, moreover, in my delight in the house of my God, the treasure I have gold and silver I have given to the house of my God, over and above all that I have already provided for the holy temple. Namely, 3,000 talents of gold. And it goes down, if you look in the overlays for the walls, in the silver and the craftsman. Notice he's given all that. Some of you look at the bottom, this is the note I'll just give you from what it says. The gold is about 3.6 million ounces. The silver about 8.4 million ounces. That's a pretty good collection out of your own pocket. But notice David gave it how? Willingly. That's what I've done, but it's not near enough, folks. And he has all the people up front. So notice what he's going to ask them. He's not asking them to do what he didn't do. Notice the first thing he does at the end of verse 3. Who then is willing to consecrate himself this day to the Lord? Before he ever asks anything, he wants them to do what? To consecrate themselves before the Lord. And then notice the next part. Then the rulers of the fathers of households, the princes of the tribes, the commanders, thousands, hundreds, overseers over the king, offered how? Willingly. And then it starts going through it. It's a huge sum that they collected. Verse 9. Then the people rejoiced because they had offered so willingly, for they made their offering to the Lord with what? What does it say? A whole heart. They consecrated themselves, and they said, we what? We want to give. And they gave willingly, from a consecrated whole heart, and it then lists, now it doesn't do specifically the people what they gave, it gave the total amounts of the different categories. They gave what? Why did they give it? They were giving it for the temple. So notice then what happens. Can you imagine if you're the leader up front, if you're David, he's giving and he sees the people just coming forth, just pouring, just all these things in order to build the temple. So notice what he does then in verse 10, and I think it's interesting that you have. So you have the challenge to the people. And I think it's interesting if we asked ourselves, and I've never looked, nor will I, how is your giving? But before, talking about giving to the church or giving, financially, whatever, do you first consecrate yourself? And two, then, do you do it willingly? Notice they gave it willingly. And they wanted to. You look at it's going to happen later on. It says, remember they gave so willingly at another time later in the Old Testament, where they had to say, stop giving, we got enough. That'd be amazing, wouldn't it? People say, hey, we don't need any more. We're all amply supplied. We don't need any more. So notice they gave willingly, and think about it in our own. Notice then the cause for celebrations in verse 10 down to 13. So David blessed the people in the sight of all the assembly, and David said, blessed art thou, Lord, O God of Israel, our Father, forever and ever. Thine, O Lord, is in greatness and power and glory and victory and majesty. Indeed, everything that is in heaven and on the earth. Thine is the dominion, O Lord, and thou dost exalt thyself as head over all. Both riches and honor come from thee. Thou dost rule over all. In thy hand is power, and lies thy hand to make great and to strengthen everyone. Notice, first of all, does he recognize God's place in praising? I think it's important. How many times do our leaders in our country recognize God in his place in praising? In fact, it's so seldom that people don't want to because of the political repercussions they'll take. But I would much rather have one that's giving God the credit that he should be receiving. Notice the second thing that it is, I think it's interesting in 14, starting in 13. Now therefore, our God, we thank thee and praise thee, glorious name. Notice 14. But who am I, and who are my people, that we should be able to offer as generously as this? For all things come from thee, and from thy hand we have given to thee. Only reason we're able to give this generously, God, is because of what? You gave it to us to begin with. You could God have taken it? You sure could have. So we're thankful that you allowed us to get these possessions, and we are giving them back to you, and thank you for letting us have them in order to give them to you. How many times do we ever think about it? Our house, or anything we have, car, anything, do we ever recognize we have them because of what? I mean, yes, you work hard for them, but if you were in a different country, you'd work hard, but you wouldn't have that nice car. You might have a cart with a mule drawing it or whatever. How many times do we ever are thankful for it? And I think it's important to recognize. And they're thankful for the mule that they're riding. That's just amazing. So I think it's important for us to recognize the cause for joy. Thankful for where we are and so on. A lot of people wish they were in yesterday. That's fine. But I didn't have air conditioning in my truck for the last month. I'm kind of glad to get it back. I really am. It's kind of nice. A lot of things I think is, my truck and work broke down. I didn't really like the walking around. I kind of like having that truck back to go around. And I think it's important for all of us to be thankful, for the things that we have. And recognize God's the one that gave it to us. Notice then how he ends. I think it's interesting in 17. Notice what he says. Since I know, O Lord, that thou triest the hearts and delightest in uprightness, I, in the integrity of my heart, have willingly offered all these things. So now with joy I've seen thy people who are present here make their offerings what? That's an amazing statement. I gave willingly. I wasn't doing it for pretense. I wasn't to make a name for myself. And I can see that the people here did the same thing. They weren't trying to make a name. They weren't doing these things. They gave willingly because they believed in what the temple built, and they did it for your glory, not for them. That's where, in any place we're doing anything, that's what we want. You want it for God's glory. But notice again, this is how David's ending. It's ending an era. Now then, how is the new era going to do the same thing? Are they going to follow the pattern that David has set and has set, and the people have, when Solomon comes on board? So I think it's interesting. He then also has a prayer then starting in 18. This is what we've done, but what about the prayer? 18. O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, our fathers, preserve this forever in the intentions of the heart of thy people, and direct their heart to thee. And give my son Solomon a perfect heart to keep thy commandments, thy testimonies, and thy statutes, to do them all, and to build the temple for which I have made provisions. Does he have a path to follow? Should it be with a pure heart? Now think about it. David's going to be gone and they have all these provisions given. Could Solomon take it and change what he wants to do with it? He sure could. And so I think it's important, and the people could likewise, and the leaders could likewise. That's why you have the accountability. All the leaders are there, and they're all giving accountability to each other. Because otherwise, anyone could turn. The military could turn, anything could turn. The accountability they all are having with a pure heart and the intention. That's David's prayer. He recognizes how easy it is to be swayed by different things. You think about it. Do I recognize God's place in my provisions? Are we going to be like the man in Luke? Look what all I've done. I'm going to build some bigger barns. You don't know. Do I consecrate myself and then give to the Lord? Why would it be important to consecrate yourself first? Could I give with the wrong motive? Could I give the wrong amount? So I think it's important for us to do that. Let's think about some applications, and you think about it. Are you fulfilling God's purpose for your life? David did. And do you think when we give an account one day, do you think he's going to say, I put you on this earth for this purpose, but then what? Did you fulfill the purpose? Not your purpose, God's purpose. What are your dreams? Are they God's dreams, and are you willing to change? Are you willing to change what you dream, what God dreamed? And by the way, does that mean it's second? Do you think when David was growing up, do you think he ever dreamt of being a king? I mean, he's the youngest, the least thought, and he's out there taking care of sheep, right? What makes you think that God's dreams are less than yours? And you're going to be the happiest when you're fulfilling God's dreams. What about the other one? Notice, you think about it, when I had on there, how is your giving? Are you first consecrating yourself and then giving yourself to the Lord? And I think it's interesting too, what's my desire? What part do I have in what He wants? And like I said, it's interesting how this is all coming together. And it's just, I have no idea where we're going. I mean, I have absolutely no idea. And just like we're talking about praying for us, there isn't one of us that feels comfortable with what we're trying to do. None of us that says, one of you make a picture or do different things. We're not like Rosemary that an artist can do it. Glenn says, I'm an accounting major. I don't know how to draw a picture. I don't either. We're trying to do things that we are totally out of our wheelhouse. So we're going to come, and then it's going to be like when I used to do stuff for the kids when I taught school, I had stick figures. They then had to put other stuff on it because the stick figure, and I had to explain the stick figure because they couldn't even figure that out. So that's what we're attempting. But again, where are we at? But look at David. At the end of an era, he's telling you a path on how he got there and how they got there and how Solomon can continue. The same patterns for us. Think about it to 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 us.